Today we're talking about a rather unusual pick, Jungle Erlang Shen. Well, originally, after this release, this was actually a more common pick. Nowadays you really don't see much of it anymore. There are reasons for that affected his jungle potential and made him a little bit weaker in that role, but I feel like he's generally very underrated. You just have to know how to play him properly and what to be aware of. That said, I don't think we'll see him competitive anytime soon, but I do think that he's a very valid pick for both ranked and casual. At least partially because he can compensate for an otherwise not ideal team comp that needs to be ironed out a little bit through a more bruisery jungler. He is definitely not the only warrior who can do this, but the other warriors that can do it in a different style, for example, think of Cyrus. The biggest benefits of having an Erlang jungle are that you have hybrid damage style between ability damage but also AA combos, and that he has a very easy time stacking certain things on enemies, which other gods can't do as quickly. A lot of this comes down to his passive, to his Howling Celestial Dog. The dog gives you the effect that many on-hit effects of items will stack twice immediately and then twice on every hit afterwards. But before we go deeper into the items, let's talk about Erlang Jungle in general. The first thing that you have to be aware of is how do you want to play him. If you, for example, picked an Erlang Jungle because you ended up with one of those low-key solos, then you will probably still have to build very tanky. As such, your build will probably not differ much from a solo build at all. It is advisable to get some sort of early damage penetration item in, which could be as simple as a Jotun's Wrath or some other options that we'll talk about in the damage segment later on, just to give you that bit of an early aggression spike, a little bit of penetration, a little bit of cooldown reduction to get the abilities off more, and then transition into a typical defense build, talking about items like, for example, Height of the Urchin, especially Shogun's Kusari, because it still gives you a little bit of attack speed as well. Then anything like Pestilence or just any physical defense option, like even if you want Mystical Mail or Height of the Nemean Lion, just the very standard tank choices to compensate for the fact that you don't have a tanky solo. That comes with some hindrances because you're usually not going to be as ahead as a solo laner in farm, and you really have to play around that. You just have to play with your team a lot, set up a lot of kills for them, and you want to utilize a slightly different leveling art in that case. If you're really going for a more tanky build, you're probably better off maxing the ultimate as soon as possible, as it will really help you in team fights. And you may also consider to maybe just opt for the pin over the spot weakness in some cases, simply due to the fact that you may have to rely a little more on safe poke and you get that to the 2 and not the 1. But that's the not so ideal scenario for an Erlang jungle. A more ideal scenario for an Erlang jungle is, for example, having a solo laner that wants to build a little bit bruisery. Say, for example, Vamana, who just benefits from having some bruiser items in his build, though then again not the most beneficial thing because you are very AA focused. Or if you have something like a solo Guardian, you may be looking for some more AA damage while still wanting to be a little bit bruisery, depending on how the combo of the enemy team is really, or if you're just playing it for fun, it doesn't really matter all too much. The options for him are there. They're not the most frequent thing, obviously, but he can be played very aggressive as well. And that's the other option in terms of building and leveling that we're going to talk about more here, because it's the one that most people are not as used to. Otherwise, you know most of the stuff from solo anyways. And that brings us to the ability leveling order. I will go into a little more detail about the abilities and why you're leveling in that order after I go through them once. You want to start with your 72 transformations. It is simply the best level 1 clear and aggression, as long as you're allowed to play a little bit aggressive against the enemy comp. Otherwise, you get the pin. On level 2, you want to get the pin because early on spot weakness really doesn't do that much for you, and you're better off having some more ability damage. AAs just don't do that much. Level 3, you can either go 72 transformations again, or you can put a point to spot weakness if you want faster jungle clear. Either of those works. I typically tend to go a little bit more with 72 transformations. Then level 4, you definitely want that point in spot weakness or in 72 transformations. Level 5, you level the ultimate, obviously. And then from then on, your priority is 72 transformations, maxing it out as soon as possible. Spot weakness afterwards, then 9 turns blessing the ultimate, and then pin. So why this order? Well, first of all, 72 transformations is just straight up his best ability. Pin used to be better, got nerfed a fair bit, and 72 transformations not only gives you more damage, with the Mink. It's the highest damaging ability, the best clear as such, with also the best scaling, but it also gives you more shield health with the turtle and more attack speed with the Mink. And the attack speed was really important here because that is where he really shines. 35 attack speed early on is nothing that should be underestimated at all. Additionally, the cooldown of this ability also goes down to 14 seconds, so no point in not leveling it pretty much. After that, the biggest priority is spot weakness, simply due to the fact that it gives you so much extra damage. Every single hit will have more damage through the activated one, and that is just simply very beneficial. Obviously, 9 Turns Blessing has a ridiculous amount of stats that would make you feel like, you know, you want to max that first at all times. This can be done. I am absolutely not against maxing the ultimate over the one, but the reason I sometimes do not opt to do that, or more often than not, is because of the general playstyle. If you're playing an aggressive Erlang Shen, then you won't be that tanky, and obviously if you taunt multiple enemies, they will attack you, at least with basic attacks, so you're gonna take damage, and if you don't have the protection to back up this taunt, it might easily become painful. You get a little bit more damage mitigation, but that's not necessarily enough to make up for the extra damage that you're gonna be taking. You also get more heal, which is nice. It's 75 extra heal, but at the moment I wouldn't value heal all too highly. You will see a lot of anti-heal decreasing any value in the first place, and on top of that, he gets a 15% maximum health heal either way, which is, in my opinion, often the more crucial part of the heal. You also don't get cooldown reduction on the ultimate, which doesn't really mean that you're gonna get more setups that way anyways if you level it. The difference between an 0.8 seconds and a 1.2 seconds taunt is only relevant if somebody is going to immediately follow it up with an ultimate. If not, if it's just going to follow by more CC or something like that, then it may not even matter. Depending on who you're with, it may matter more or less. For example, if you're with a Poseidon, then the ultimate should be enough of lockdown. If you're with a Ra with a little bit of the charge on the ultimate, you may want to put an extra point or extra 2 points into the ult just to give him an easier setup, as long as he plays accordingly. The 2 is leveled last simply because it only gives you some extra damage and also costs more mana at the same time. I would hate to not have enough mana to use these abilities at some point, because you want to lock down enemies with that and deal damage with the other abilities, so the main utility is achieved as soon as you have 1 point in it and your other abilities just give you more. The only reason to ever level this earlier is if you're really pressured out and you just want to have some safe poke and you can't AA anymore. Before we go into the items, let's talk about the playstyle. With Erlang, you want to go in hard. You want to play very aggressive as soon as you can because you have high damage and high AA damage. So when you're playing from the jungle position, more often than not, I find myself actually going in with a Mink. Unless the enemies have a lot of means of stopping that. In that case, obviously you're still going with the turtle to get the extra shield and you set up for your team. But as long as you're not with more than one teammate at least, I feel like in many situations the Mink will be more beneficial through the extra attack speed and the AAs that follow and the Hasten Fatalis effect that you get from it. If you activate the 3, hit an enemy, hit them with the 1 right away, and then just pin them down if they try to get away in one way or another, either before or after using the escape, then you should be all set to catch up to them and, well, potentially kill them. Obviously, if they are quick to get away, you want to use your ultimate, and that's where I think the ultimate shines more when you're playing an aggressive jungle role. You're not going to do as many big team setups because you're not going to be that deep in a fight, but rather you're going to use it for a quick lockdown on the enemy and just burst them down before they can even get out. Unless obviously you have a team really playing well with you. To support this aggressive playstyle, you obviously need matching items, and there are quite a few. First of all, there's Eveline. Eveline used to be the one and only go-to item, but Eveline got nerfed this patch. I do think it's still very good on him simply because he gets a lot out of it due to his dog proccing 2 hits at once, but it's not as good as it was before. Still a very good option if you want to go into AAs straight away. But there are more options than that. If you want to go for some early aggression / protection and you can afford it, you can actually go into Stonecutting Sword, which will give you a lot of mobility, a lot of ability damage, and you can still shred enemies very quickly due to the double stack. The same goes for Executioner, which was buffed this patch, so it has even more power, giving you a decent ability damage spike as well as the protection shred. Obviously, percentage penetration becomes more valuable later into the game, so keep that in mind. But I do think it's actually a pretty solid pickup relatively early in the game though. The main benefit that Stonecutting Sword has over it is obviously the added protection for yourself. Then there's also Heartseeker, which is surprisingly underrated in this context. It got a buff this patch, so it's a little bit better. And what you can do with it is you can proc it with your 72 transformations, unless you get CC'd out. So you get your first hit when you initiate into a fight. And then you can just basic attack the enemy, which happens very, very quickly with Erlang Shen, obviously using your 1. And you will only need 3 hits due to the dog to fully stack Heartseeker again, which means you can get another proc of Heartseeker off your 2 afterwards. So a lot of benefit in that if you use it properly. What you already may realize here is that he benefits a lot from various early game items. You can obviously also go for Ragnar's Mask if you want to, if you really want the CDR, the movement speed, and the pen. He is very snowbally, so it's kind of possible to stack it early, though I think usually there are better options for him. As for the later slots, it depends a little bit on how much you can get away with. I would try to fit in Height of the Urchin in most of the builds, simply because it gives you so much tankiness in a single item, and maybe a Spirit Robe as well, just so you have that mixed defense, which, you know, should be sufficient. But if you can get away with it, you can literally build something like, for example, Ikaival into Heartseeker, into Executioner, Kin Size, and just proc it all the way through and shred people apart with a Stone-Cutting Sword maybe. It just depends on how much the enemy team allows you to do before they start shutting you down, because after all, you're not a Kali and your ultimate doesn't really save you as much. On the same note, he has twice the chance to proc Malice, Wind Demon, or Poison Star, so these are, as such, logical, legitimate options, but I hardly ever see them actually work. It's just very, very risky, because with them you're straying away very far from your typical item choices just in order to get them going, and maybe one of them can be fit into a build late game, maybe Poison Star just to give you some safety in other regards, to some protection, but I would not highly advise them. As for the boots, I would actually prefer Ninja Tabi most of the time, simply because the whole build is so AA focused, but in the end it depends a little bit on how much attack speed you will have in your total build, especially with your 3 activated, and if you want that early ability damage spike with Warrior Tabi. I just know that Ninja Tabi has a little more value in terms of stats overall, and Erlang can make use of these stats if you play him hyper carry focused enough. While a lot of these items may resemble a Kali or Bakasura build, there's one item you should stay away from, and that's Hasten Katana. You have a built-in hasten effect that you can use as long as you're not setting up for a team, and you have 2 ways of locking down an enemy. If that isn't enough, then Hasten Katana won't save you either, so I wouldn't advise it. And to roll it up, your starter item aside of Bombas should pretty much always be Death Toll, even as a jungler, yes. The sustain is so good just due to the fact that you can double proc it with your dog, and that's something that just pretty much always makes sense. If you want to go super annoying and just super sustain, you can add a Gladiator Shield to that, though I would not build it most of the time. Also, I'd like to mention the Ancient Blade tree. He can make very good use of both Witch Blade and Toxic Blade in the right build, so don't underestimate that, and Wing Blade is obviously a given when it's required. With that, thank you guys for watching. I hope this gave you a decent overview of how you can play this rather unconventional character in this role, and I hope this was interesting. If you're not subscribed yet, feel free to click the sub button and maybe the bell. It really helps me out. See you for the next one tomorrow. Duke Sloth, out.